What is your reaction to the verdict?
I am very satisfied with the verdict. I think the jury really considered everything and came to the right conclusion. So I'm very satisfied.
Anyone else want to answer that? No.
I think we're just pleased. I think it was not out of our, not something we wouldn't have anticipated that coming back that way. And so I think the jury did a good job with the case. It was difficult.
So why do you think the jury did not go with second-degree murder?
Well, the jury instructions for second-degree murder involve a depraved mind, and which is hatred, ill will, spite, or evil intent. And I think probably some of the jurors felt that was present and some of the jurors maybe did not. So I believe that's what happened.
Okay. And what do you feel like your strongest pieces of evidence were in this case that led to the jury's decision?
I think the strongest pieces of evidence were the history as a whole, and then the actual facts and evidence of what happened at that moment when the homicide happened. I think that was the strongest piece.
I think it was important that she said that he hit her on the side of the face and where it was, and the evidence that we were able to present to kind of question some of her version of the events. I think that we had some good evidence to challenge what she was saying was her version of events.
So you think that's what won your case?
Not completely, but I think that was important.
It's helpful.
Yes.
Okay. And what do you think really happened after Doug arrived at Ashley's the mother's home?
I don't really want to comment on that. I only want to comment with about things in the trial. So,
okay. And the argument and motive that you laid out at trial was that Ashley sought sole custody of her child and needed Doug out of the way by a specific date, which speaks to an intent and premeditated plan to kill. Did you ever consider filing first-degree murder charges? And why do you feel second degree was more appropriate in this case?
We consider everything. When we're deciding to charge a case, we look at every charge and we decide which charge is the most appropriate for the facts. And in this particular case, we felt second degree was a better charge than first degree premeditated.
Okay. Ashley Benefield claimed, obviously, domestic violence. She was very emotional when she testified. As a woman, she touched me when I was watching it. I sympathized as a mother. That jury was 5 women, 1 man. How do you feel that you were able to convince this almost predominantly female jury otherwise to think of it a little differently?
I think what I am willing to say about that at this point is it made a difference to them that her past domestic violence that she claimed was so long ago. It was 3 years ago. And that basically within the 3 years, there hadn't been any violence in between. So I believe that they felt that her justification for being so scared maybe was not appropriate.
I think, as we look at the verdict of the jury, and you mentioned the composition of the jury, I think one of the things that we know definitively about this case is that the court randomly selected 6 members from our community, right? These are folks from our community right here in Manatee County that from everything that we saw and we observed that they fairly and impartially absorbed, listened, evaluated, and considered all of the evidence in this case. And they heard everything. They heard the state side, they heard the defense side, they heard from the state experts, they heard from the defense experts, and then they listened to the judge give them the instructions on the law in this case. And I think that they very carefully and attentively listened and applied the law to this case. And I think that we now saw that a jury has rendered a fair and impartial verdict in this case, having considered everything. They know everything in this case. They considered all of the evidence.
All right. Touchy subject, though, domestic violence. What would you like? Well, what message do you send to victims of domestic violence right now who find themselves in threatening situations? Because this is something, unfortunately, that goes on daily.
I would say, first and foremost, I think that what I would say is the state attorney and us as an office, and I think all of us that are sitting here with Suzanne and Rebecca, we stand strong against domestic violence. We're an office that strongly believes in vigorously prosecuting those that commit acts of domestic abuse. But in every case, I think it really requires a careful analysis if there is going to be use of force, right? And here, where it takes someone's life, I think we're going to be able to analyze and consider those events. And so I think my conclusion is, you can't take the law into your own hands. And I think that's what Ashley Benefield demonstrated here, is that she wasn't happy with the judicial system, and she wanted certain things that she didn't get through the judicial system, and she decided to take the law into her own hands. But that doesn't take away from victims of domestic violence. And we know that there were some things that occurred here in this case that he shouldn't have done. And we don't stand by those things, right? We know that there were things like that occurred. But we strongly stand with the victims of domestic violence. We're going to aggressively prosecute those that commit acts of domestic violence. And we're going to stand with our victims. But we will, on every single case, we're going to closely analyze the facts and evidence in this case. And I think at the end of the day, in this particular case, when it dealing with Ashley Benefield, when you looked at that fatal moment when she took the life of a father of two young children, two children and a husband, someone who had demonstrated his desire to reconcile, that he loved her, and that he wanted to move to Maryland to be with her and to reconcile with the child, and the way in which that event unfolded, that it was not a justified use of force. And the one thing I'll tell you about the Manatee County Sheriff's Office and Rebecca and Suzanne and our team here, they've been involved in this case, and I would say this was not a brief investigation. This was 4 years of us speaking with investigators, working with investigators, speaking to all of the parties that were involved in this case, all of the lawyers that were involved, the medical professionals, the crime scene professionals, hearing everything that the defense had. This was a very well vetted case and very well understood case, I think, by our folks here and by Rebecca and Suzanne. And I think they did a great job of presenting that. And so I'm grateful to the jury for rendering a fair and impartial verdict. And I think justice was heard in this county this week.
And I as to those victims, I think we would say that law enforcement in this community takes it very seriously, like Ed said, and so do we. And we would just ask them to get help, to do what they think is best for their situation, and to seek help from their family or their law enforcement or whoever that can help them. And when they get here, we'll be here to help them as the best we can if law allows it.
Do you feel like this case changes the way people may respond to this, or sending a strong message? You said that was one of them. Do not take the law into your own hands.
I think that is what was very clear to us here, is that this was an example of someone that decided to take the law into their own hands. And I think that's going to have legal consequences and repercussions. And so that's what people need to be careful about. But we do stand with victims, and we do fight against domestic abusers, and we do hold them accountable. So as Rebecca indicated, they do need to report it. They do need to talk to law enforcement. Law enforcement's going to work very closely with them to do everything they can to protect them. And we have wonderful organizations in our community that care about our victims and want to provide support to them.
Okay. As of now, no sentencing date, as I know of, has been set.
That is correct.
Okay. What are you recommending, or what are you hoping for?
We're recommending the maximum sentence. The maximum sentence is 30 years, and that's what the state would recommend.
And as I hear that question and I frame that question, to me, what's the life of Doug Benefield worth, right? A family man who had 2 children, who was in the prime of his life. What is the life of one's, the loss that his family felt, right? All of his family, his loved ones, all those that cared about him. And so that's why, we're proud with the verdict. We think that this spoke justice for the family of Doug Benefield. But his life was worth something, and it deserves an appropriate punishment.
I've heard when it's a case like this, it's very hard because you only had Ashley's side. You had family and people that knew them, but was this a difficult case to try because of that? It was very, it was only from Ashley's side.
Go ahead.
I was I was just going to say it's not uncommon in self-defense cases, and Suzanne and I try a lot of cases together here, and we see it a lot, and it does make it much more difficult because you're dealing with one version of events, like you said, and it's hard sometimes to counteract. I don't know what the right word would be to show that whether or not their story is true.
And I think the best way to do that is to look at the actual facts of what happened and see if they match with the story that the one person is telling.
Like the physical evidence.
The physical evidence. And I think that played into it in this case, that I think the one person that was telling the story was telling a story that didn't necessarily match with the rest of the physical evidence in the case.
And have you, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I guess just the only other thing I wanted to add is, law enforcement on a daily basis, when they are called to evaluate a use of force case where someone's lost their life, they conduct their investigation and make a determination as to whether or not the individual was justified in the use of force. And then we do the same thing. And we have seen examples where law enforcement's made that determination and they don't refer charges. And there have been cases that are referred to this office and we haven't filed charges because we believe that there is a justified use of force. So I think it really does depend uniquely on each case and looking at all of the facts. And I think the fact that our folks here had the opportunity to work with this case for a very extensive period of time, for 4 years, and to learn all the nuances of this case really spoke to this case.
Was there at any point during the trial that you thought maybe it wasn't going to go, were you worried that maybe they weren't going to find her guilty or, emotional?
I'm sorry, I kind of smiled because that's every case.
Okay.
I think when we do trials, that is just a part of it. That
so up and down.
At some point, you're going to say nothing's going right or this isn't going to come out or whatever. And I think that's natural. So I think that's any case. But this jury really paid attention and they seemed like they were really absorbing the information. So I was very hopeful that they would come to what I saw was the correct conclusion. And I think they did.
With that said, was there any point where you thought, this is good, I've got it, I think I've convinced them?
I don't think I ever feel that way completely. I definitely didn't in this case feel that, I definitely got this. It was a question all the way through.
Until you heard the verdict?
Yes.
What about with all the attention, the media attention this received locally, nationally, worldwide? Do you think that had any influence on the jury at all or the case?
I don't know that it had any influence on the jury. I know in jury selection, the judge spoke to them a lot about media attention and had they seen any media? Did they have any information? And we were very careful to not keep anyone that had already formed opinions based on the media coverage. So I think the court works very hard to keep the media separate from the jury. And I think ultimately it could have influenced it, but in this case, it didn't seem like it did influence it.
Okay. What do you think the people of Manatee and Sarasota counties need to know right now why this case was so significant, if you do?
I go back to I think the message here in this trial and when people look at this case is simply, I go back to, someone just can't take the law into their own hands. And I think this was somebody who was exasperated by the judicial system, wasn't getting the outcomes that they desired, and they felt that they were going to take legal action into their own hands. And I think we heard from, Detective Chris Gillen with the Manatee County Sheriff's Office, who I think, just as an illustrative point was the issue about, demanding that he arrest Doug Benefield in open court in the presence of the judge so that could influence her custody battle. And I think that was, very illustrative of kind of her intentions. And unfortunately, and fortunately for us, he didn't do that. He felt that wasn't the right course of action, and he told her that. But she did say that, she was going to take matters into her own hands. And I think we just need to caution people that, because every day people get angry with someone And we've seen a number of incidents throughout Manatee County and throughout our region, Sarasota County, where people do get upset with another person and they impulsively react, and then later they have to regret it.
Yeah. The evidence laid out by both sides at trial painted an incredibly toxic domestic situation. Several people, like you were saying right now, including law enforcement, were aware that this couple had a volatile history and access to firearms. People close to Doug felt like Ashley was going to do something to him. Do you feel like Doug's death was unavoidable? Or excuse me, avoidable, the word. Let me re-ask that. Do you feel like Doug's death was avoidable?
Yeah, I don't think we can.
I don't think I can really answer that question right now.
Okay. What have you learned from this case moving forward, or did you learn anything from it?
Patience. Sometimes justice takes a long time and a lot of work. So, but I think ultimately I have faith that the right thing happens. So.
And you touched on this, Ed, but it took many years to get to this trial. What resources were used? What all did it take? We only see you going to trial. We don't see all the phone calls, all the interviews. It wasn't just talking to Ashley. It was talking to law enforcement. What would you tell people that it took to get everything together where you felt like you had a solid case?
It took years, first of all. And we do speak with detectives. We listen to the interviews. We listen to the recordings. We look at the physical evidence. We have to go to the evidence department at the sheriff's office and look at all the physical evidence. We have to do depositions of each witness. And there's so much more that we could just go on and on. But there is a lot that goes on behind the scenes before a trial starts. So.
And I think maybe that's one thing people don't realize, and I wouldn't have realized if this wasn't our job, but she and I start at the beginning in these cases. The law enforcement calls us when a homicide occurs, and oftentimes we go out to the scene and we're really trying to work with them from the very beginning to make sure if they have questions, we can answer them and vice versa. And I think that's one of the things that is why it takes so much patience, is because it's really a very long process. It starts sometimes before arrest. I mean, this was 5 weeks, I think, right? 5 weeks until they arrested her. And so I think that's one of the things that, in this case, was expert heavy. Also, there was a lot of experts involved, which adds complication to cases because you end up having to make decisions about how to deal with those experts and do we need to get experts and those kind of things.
So you both were called out on this from the beginning?
At the time, I was.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And so I went.
So you saw it from beginning to the end of the trial?
Yes, from the day it happened.
Wow.
Yes.
So I think what this really demonstrates is, and I honestly, in my opinion about this case, is that this was never a close call for us. You know, this was always a clear case of homicide. And I think that their thorough investigation and their exposure to this case and all of the facets of this case over 4 years always maintain that position.
Okay, so overall, again, you're satisfied with the way it turned out, even though it wasn't second-degree murder, it was manslaughter. You felt like this was a success.
Yes.
It was a very fair verdict.
Yes.
All right. Is there anything you'd like to add that you feel like I didn't touch on?
No, I think that was it.
Larry?
No, believe it or not.
And Jeff?
What a chance. It's difficult. I mean, you got justice for his family. Look at Summer.
Oh.
But I mean, there's that little girl. I mean, it's tragic. I mean, that family, she lost both parents.
And I think that's what tug at people's hearts. You know, you did have that little girl and then the other daughter too. And now this child has lost both her parents.
And I think no matter what contributed to a situation, that child had nothing to do with this. And it's sad. She lost her father. Her mother's not going to be around. I think no matter how you look at it, it's sad.
So you have to detach from that, though,
Yes.
because you have to stick to the evidence. And
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and his daughter, right, lost their father, her
Yes.
Right, and had just lost her mother. That's another thing. And, you know, we had a lot more contact with Eva, obviously, than we would have with Emerson. But I think
Right.
that's another thing that makes it difficult because it's real and it's tangible. And she had just lost her mother when these events all started happening, when he got remarried. I think it had only been 9 months. And so Eva's now without either of her parents, too.
And no matter how you look at it, the actions of Ashley Benefield on that day created this sadness with all of these people, with her daughter, with her family, with Doug's family, with Doug himself. And I don't lose sight of that it's sad for everyone.
Right. So now you're just waiting on the sentencing date. Do you think you'll learn that soon? Or
Hopefully we will learn that soon. Usually it takes a few days. The judge's assistant tries to get dates that fit with everyone's schedule. And so that's kind of what's going on now.
And what can we expect next?
The sentencing date typically is within 30 to 45 days of the actual verdict. And then there will be a sentencing hearing where each side gets to present witnesses or family members or anyone that may have anything relevant to say, and then make arguments, and then the judge will decide the sentence.
Say Ashley is sentenced to the max, 30 years. Is there a good chance she'll serve all 30 years, or will good behavior come into play? Or?
Well, in the state of Florida, we do not have parole. In the state of Florida, everyone has to do at least 85% of their sentence. So she would have to do she would have to do 85% of 30 years. And that's if she has good behavior. So if she doesn't have good behavior, it could go to the full 30 years. So.
And this is a question you may not know, but do you know where she would be sent to? Or is that, who decides that? What?
The Department of Corrections will decide that. She'll go there and to reception, and then they determine where she should go.
And will it be in Florida, or will she be sent out of state?
Florida.
Somewhere in Florida, but we don't have any control over that.
Okay. Do you feel like we should know anything else?
I think that covers
I think
it.
so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very
You're welcome.
educational too. Thank you.